Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what I think is one of the biggest economic developments we've seen inside Russia for some time. Russian-installed authorities have declared a state of emergency in Crimea. Fuel sales have been restricted, public transport services have been cut back, shops and cafes have had to reduce their opening hours, street lighting has been dimmed to conserve power, and Vladimir Putin has publicly admitted that Russia is facing fuel shortages and established a special government task force to deal with the problem. Now, if you've been following this channel for a while, one question should immediately spring to mind. How can one of the world's largest oil producers be running short of fuel? Russia produces around 9 million barrels of crude oil every single day. It's one of the biggest energy exporters on the planet, yet we're now seeing emergency measures, rationing, export bans, and even discussions about importing fuel. So what is going on? Well, the answer is actually fascinating because this isn't an oil crisis, it's a refining crisis. Now, before we get into the details of all of this, could I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscribe button and also give me a thumbs up for this video. And if you'd like to, you can hype the video. There's a little hype symbol alongside where the thumbs up is. If you hype it, then basically it gives it a bit of a boost with the algorithm and more people will get to see it. So let's take a closer look as to what's going on. The images coming out of Crimea over the past few days are extraordinary. Following a series of Ukrainian attacks, Russian-installed authorities declared a state of emergency. Fuel supplies have become so tight that restrictions have been introduced on who can buy fuel and how much they can purchase. In some areas, premium gasoline is only available using coupons. Sales of regular gasoline have been limited to around 20 litres per vehicle. Filling portable fuel cans has been banned altogether, and there have been reports of long queues forming at gas stations. Authorities have also introduced wide emergency measures. Public transport services are ending earlier in the evening. Large shops and cafes have reduced their opening hours. Mass outdoor events have been cancelled, and some street lighting has been switched off as officials attempt to manage the disruption. This isn't what you'd normally associate with one of the world's biggest energy exporters, and Crimea isn't the only place experiencing problems. Reports from Russia suggest that 50 Russian regions have now introduced either government-imposed restrictions or company restrictions on fuel sales as supplies become increasingly stretched. Some petrol stations have stopped selling fuel in containers, others have introduced limits. Priority is increasingly being given to emergency services, agriculture, and other essential users. Taken individually, these might just look like isolated problems, but when you look at the bigger picture, it suggests something is going on. And perhaps the clearest indication came directly from President Putin. Rather than dismissing the reports, which he would normally do, he publicly acknowledged that fuel shortages exist in several regions and announced the creation of a special task force to coordinate fuel supplies across the country. He also admitted that Russia has already begun drawing on its strategic gasoline reserves and confirmed that routine maintenance at several refineries has been postponed in an effort to maximise fuel production. That last point I think is particularly interesting. Postponing maintenance might increase fuel supplies in the short term, but refineries are incredibly complex industrial facilities. Skipping scheduled maintenance increases the risk of equipment failures later on and simply stores up future problems. So how has Russia found itself in this position? Well, the answer lies in Ukraine's changing strategy. At the start of the war, much of the attention focused on oil production, but over the last 2 years, Ukraine has increasingly shifted its attention towards Russia's refining industry. And from an economic perspective, that makes perfect sense. Crude oil on its own isn't particularly useful. You can't fill up your vehicle with crude oil or put it into an aircraft or into tractors or trucks or military vehicles. None of them would work using crude oil. It first has to pass through a refinery where it's converted into things like gasoline, diesel, aviation fuel, and dozens of other refined products. If you repeatedly damage the refineries, you create a bottleneck. Russia can continue pumping millions of barrels of crude oil every day, but if the refineries are offline, Russia loses its ability to turn that crude oil into fuel that can be used for all those different purposes. Russia has around 44 major oil refineries. These are huge, and they're spread across the largest country on earth. Some are located close to St. Petersburg, others are around Moscow, others are in Tatarstan, Samara, Bashkortostan, the Urals, Siberia, and the Far East. They are spread across thousands of miles. Now imagine trying to defend all of those facilities simultaneously. It's going to be very difficult, in fact, probably impossible. Russia has strengthened its air defences and deployed electronic warfare systems. It's even installed anti-drone netting around some of those refineries so that the drones can't actually strike the facilities. But every time additional protection is moved from one location, another refinery becomes more exposed. And Ukraine only needs 1 or 2 drones to get through. In a recent report from Russia, they claim to have intercepted more than 550 Ukrainian drones, including almost 200 heading towards the Moscow region. That's in one night. So those numbers sound impressive in terms of the defence from Russia's point of view, but they also demonstrate the challenge Russia is facing. Even if 99% of all of the drones are intercepted, a handful still reach their target, and a single successful strike can shut down an important refining unit for weeks or even months. According to industry estimates, refining capacity equivalent to almost 3 million barrels per day has been disrupted at various stages this year. Not all of that has been offline at the same time because repairs are constantly taking place, but the repeated cycle of attack, repair and attack is placing enormous pressure on Russia's refining industry. We're also seeing knock-on effects. The Russian government has already banned gasoline exports in order to keep more fuel inside the country. It's also introduced its first ever ban on aviation fuel exports, which is expected to remain in place until at least November 2026. Officials are now actively considering whether diesel exports should also be restricted again, and that would be another significant escalation because diesel is one of Russia's biggest export products and a major source of foreign currency earnings. And perhaps the most remarkable development of all is that Russia has been reportedly now importing gasoline. Now, if we just take a step back and think about that, one of the world's largest oil producers potentially importing fuel. Well, it's importing gasoline into some of these regions because it just doesn't have enough to keep the economy going. The irony of that is extraordinary. Russia continues to produce enormous volumes of crude oil. Some of that crude oil is exported to countries such as India and China. But the fact that Russia is now having to import refined fuel back into the country to fill its domestic shortages really shows you that there's a big problem. It's a situation that would have seemed unimaginable a few years ago, certainly before the war in Ukraine started. From an economic perspective, fuel shortages affect far more than just motorists. Diesel powers trucks, it powers farm machinery, mining equipment, construction sites. Higher fuel costs feed into food prices, transport costs, manufacturing costs, and ultimately general inflation. The military also consumes huge quantities of refined fuel. Every aircraft, tank, truck, and naval vessel requires a constant supply. So every litre directed towards military operations in Ukraine is a litre that isn't available for the civilian economy. And that's why this story matters. This isn't simply about queues at gas stations. It's about whether Ukraine has identified one of the most effective ways of placing sustained pressure on the Russian economy. Russia still has vast oil reserves. It produces millions of barrels of crude oil every day. But if it becomes increasingly difficult to convert that oil into gasoline, diesel and aviation fuel, to name just 3, then the economic consequences become much more significant. For most of the past 4 years, we've talked about sanctions, inflation and interest rates. But this is something different. This is physical damage to infrastructure that keeps the Russian economy moving. The emergency measures we're now seeing in Crimea, the restrictions spreading across dozens of regions, the export bans and the creation of President Putin's task force and the discussions about fuel imports all point in the same direction. Pressure is building in Russia. And if the attacks on Russia's refining industry continue over the next few months, which President Zelensky of Ukraine has said will happen, I think this has the potential to become one of the biggest economic stories of the second half of 2026. So I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments, but hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. If you did like what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and maybe hit that hype button if you can see it. Thank you so much to everyone that's supported me. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you for that support. Without it, I don't think I would have kept going on YouTube, so it's really important to me, so thank you so much.